Hello everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here, back with part 2 of the Q&A video for Norsca. I apologize that it took a few days. I've been having some medical issues, but we'll talk about that when it's more relevant. In any event, you know the drill, so let's go ahead and get started. The Great Book of Grudges asks, do Norsca only worship the Chaos Gods and not others? So essentially, last video we already answered this, but there are very minor exceptions. However, when you get to the northern half of Norsca, those tribes exclusively worship chaos. So the southern tribes, you'll find a little bit of examples, but northern tribes, absolutely not. Just going to be pure chaos up there. Our next question comes from Sotek the Snake God, who asks, have the Norscans met the Skaven, and if so, what do they think of them? Oh yes, the Norscans have faced the limitless legions of the Skaven many times. Honestly, as a rule of thumb, every single race in the Warhammer world has fought the Skaven. As one would expect, the Skaven of Hellpit have battled against the Norscans countless times. It's a mutually beneficial war, however, as for Clan Moulder, the Norscans provide excellent slave quality, have many types of monsters that are essential to capture for research, and of course prove as excellent testing fodder for their new horrible creations. While on the other hand, the Norscans glorify battle and hunting horrible beasts in the name of their gods. The Skaven of Clan Moulder provide relatively easy access to monstrous creatures and endless hordes against which to claim glory. As for actual feelings towards one another, they completely despise one another. Although both gain from their wars, the Skaven hate all other races with a passion, and the Norscans are fairly angered by the horrible experiments and atrocities the Skaven have committed against the Northmen in the name of science. Our next question, moving along, comes from Salim Al-Nassis. All the questions will be down in the description. If not when the video releases, then very quickly afterwards, so you don't have to worry about, apologies if I pronounce your name wrong. He has two questions. The first is, are the Norscans actually known for using chariots in the lore, or is it just a total war thing? And the second question is, are there any accounts of a Fimmer or Skinwolf leading armies of Norscans or other creatures into battle? So starting with the first question, it's more of a total war thing. The idea of chariots being a central part of Norscan armies didn't really exist until the AI of Total War Warhammer spammed them to an absurd extent, and led to Surtha Ek becoming both a meme and the nightmare of most campaign players, especially more inexperienced ones. Norsca doesn't have the materials to reliably produce a ton of chariots in their original canon. Not to mention, chariots aren't really the best thing for Norscan longships that launch lightning raids. Which, for those of you who wonder, Norscans do have access to a fair amount of quality wood that they used to build their longships and dragon ships, but the thing about Chaos Chariots in particular is that they're very noted to be made almost entirely out of metal. Whereas some races like the Tomb Kings and the High Elves, you might see almost exclusively wooden chariots with like accents or important bits of metal. The Chaos Chariots, both variants, are just metallic. There's very little wood, if any, usually used by them. So long story short, it's just a total war thing. But the way CA chose to design the chariots for Norsca made them fit actually extremely well. The OG chariot races for Warhammer, though, are Greenskins, High and Dark Elves, Warriors of Chaos, and Beastmen, all having 2 to 3 types. The Tomb Kings are, of course, the Master Chariot race, though, funny enough, the Demons of Chaos have a bizarrely massive roster of chariots, most of which were added to their roster after the book's initial release. I mean, there's one for Khorne, 2 alternate builds for a Tzeentch chariot, and of course Slaanesh goes ham with 3 different chariots available. But going back to Norsca for just a moment, in fact, Norsca originally had nothing to do with the Chaos Chariots. The crew for both the Chaos Chariot and the Gore Beast Chariot back in the day of 8th edition were actually full-blown Chaos Warriors. You'd never see those chariots in traditional Norscan raids, but instead in the invasions of the Warriors of Chaos. Obviously, this changed in base Total War when the regular Chaos Chariot gained a Marauder crew that made it fit well in the Norscan roster, and of course in the Norscan DLC when we saw the invention of the Ice Wolf's chariot. But I really enjoy both those units, and I think the way that they kind of change the chariots makes them fit extremely well. As for the second question, no, not really. There wasn't a correlation deeply established between the Fimir and the Norskins until their DLC. However, it should be noted that Fimir, as an army, are often led into battle by their own characters, most notably the Fimir Noble or Fimir Matriarch. The Matriarchs are extremely scary and are the full-on leader of any Fimir stronghold, while the Nobles are the next highest rank and are deadly generals and warriors. So traditionally, outside of the Total War universe, if you ran into Fimir, it'd usually be like an army of Fimir. Of course, though, when we got the expansion for Storm of Magic and the Monstrous Arcanum, they became like supplemental monster units that you could add to various Chaos factions, which is super fun and great. And it was nice to see them come back because they were a race way back in the day in Warhammer Fantasy, but they got cut out eventually. So it was nice to see them return. As for Skin Wolves, still not really. They're honestly too far gone with madness and bloodlust during their transformations and are quite difficult to control unless in service to the Dark Gods. The Werekin was a new invention for them, and honestly a heroic version is probably the highest rank they could be trusted with. Moving onwards, Dex 97131 asks, do all Norskins frantically worship the Chaos Gods, or are there some that are their own men, like Mortkin or Kanto the Unsworn? And I know this is technically a second question, but I couldn't find any information on this, so it would be great if you could answer. Is there a non-Chaos God Valhalla, or is Mortkin simply being tortured for all eternity in the Chaos Realms? Love the Q&A format, by the way, and sorry for the long question. Cheers. No apology needed for long questions, good sir. I actually enjoy those because it lets me get into more detail. So, in any event, we've covered most of this question, so I'll just touch on a couple of highlights for anyone that maybe missed the first video or needs a refresher. Yes, there are Norskins and even Warriors of Chaos who don't worship the Dark Gods, but instead have alliances of convenience for a particular goal, such as Mortkin the Fell Reaver, who we went into detail about last video, and Archaon Everchosen, who was the last and greatest of the Everchosens. Honestly, these Chaos Warlords are in general the most dangerous, as they're likely to wield the gifts and soldiers of all four gods who shower them with power and gifts to try and claim their sole allegiance. Chaos Undivided is amusingly both the weakest and strongest end of the spectrum for Chaos. As for Mortkin, we discussed last video that there is indeed a different afterlife that's essentially discount Valhalla for those who pursue it. I cannot say for certain if Mortkin was granted access to the halls of his fathers, but I can say that he avoided the clutch of the Dark Brothers. They were not thrilled with the fact that he managed to slip away from them. Squats Forever asks, how advanced are the Norskins in terms of their naval technology? Very little. The Norskins tend to be very much in the ballpark of if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of race, and rarely develop technological advances. After they design their great success of the Longship, they rarely innovate further on it except for like aesthetic things or maybe changing the size to fit their raiding parties. Most creatures of Chaos, with the exception of the Skaven and Chaos Dwarves, barely consider innovating and instead rely heavily upon the gifts of the Dark Gods. This is how we end up with lords like Gutrot Spume, who's the Jarl of the Dragonbone tribe and the lord of the mightiest plague fleet to currently roam the seas. Which, for those of you not aware, Gutrot Spume is the Tentacle Lord, and he's kind of a Norscan seafaring character that showed up in the end times. But he's very interesting and cool, and he's a lovely model. So now we have Inquisitor Thomas asking, how do the Norskins transport their war mammoths out of Norsca? Do they actually have ships capable of carrying something that massive, or was taking mammoths on ships a gameplay concession in Total War Warhammer? So, Norscan longships are really, really big. Though in the lore, Chaos Mammoths have never really been sighted in lands that they couldn't easily have walked to. Luckily for Norsca, pretty much every empire of note can be marched over to, with the exception of Ulthuan. But Chaos Worshippers are living embodiments of where there's a will, there's a way. But long story short, yes, there are Norscan vessels capable of transporting colossal monsters like giants and mammoths, especially if you get a little help from the Dark Gods. But hell, if the Greenskins can manage it, anyone can. If you've seen ever, like, the game Dreadfleet, for instance, Warhammer ships can get hysterically large. Like, we're talking floating cities, practically. I mean, that's what Black Orcs are. But pretty much every race in the Warhammer world, if they desire a ship that's large enough to carry something like War Mammoths, there's a way they can pull it off between a combination of crude engineering and magic, if nothing else. Alright, going over to Cryotier, he asks, I know there are beastmen in Norsca, but are there greenskin tribes as well? Yes, there are greenskin tribes everywhere, except Ulthuan. Everywhere, except Ulthuan. Especially Troll Country, which is just below Norsca. That damn place is crawling with greenskins. And that's actually where Azhag the Slaughterer is originally from. That's where he found the Crown of Sorcery and started his whole escapades. Next is Jonathan, who asks, is Valkia the Bloody the only Valkyrie of the Hound, aka Khorne, or are there more? So, Valkia the Bloody is very unique, and she is the only one of her kind. She's not exactly a demon prince, or princess rather, but she's not human either. She straddles a really bizarre line between being demonic and human. She is the consort of the Blood God and is his only paramour. Conran Black asks, does Norsca have any relations with southern regions such as Tilia? So, we answered this mostly last time, but yes, Marienburg has fostered a relationship with some of the less violent southern tribes, but one can find Norskins pretty much anywhere in the world as traders or raiders. It should be noted, though, it's more common to find them as foe instead of friend. Space Wolf Blackmane asks, are there any Skinwolf chieftains or war leaders, and are there any major minor characters CA could use? Unfortunately not. Skinwolves were used rather exclusively as shock troops by the Tides of Chaos. Creative Assembly made some awesome additions with, like, the Werekin, but Skinwolves are a relatively rare thing in Warhammer, and thus we don't have any named ones. Let's move on to Horgath the Putrid. Hopefully I pronounced that right. How often does a Norscan become a Chaos Warrior / champion, and when they become the Chaos Warrior, do they often leave the tribe, or do they often stay with their tribe? And could a Chaos Warrior have a proper family, you know, like a child and a wife? So, becoming a Warrior of Chaos is a long and difficult journey that many do not survive. I would hesitate to say it's rare, but it's definitely uncommon to make it all the way. Most of the time, those who become full-blown warriors are no longer truly human. They don't need to eat, sleep, or rest at all in many cases, and nearly all of them have been reshaped by the Dark God's blessings. Thus, practically all of them leave home as they continue seeking glory and ways to please their gods. One must remember that this is the greatest honor possible in Norscan culture. Staying at home and dying of old age is considered the ultimate failure and dishonor. Plus, you'll basically go to the Norscan form of hell or be reborn as something disgraceful in their culture, like a woman, or a slave, or the worst option, a southerner. There are, of course, exceptions, but these are very rare. Though sometimes individuals will go off and become like a Chaos Lord or some powerful entity, and they'll like set up a camp in Norsca. Some of the Norscan kings, for instance, are warriors of chaos, but it's still rare to see them come home. And even if they do, the odds of them being like a family kind of guy is incredibly small, though not impossible. You know, every Chaos Warrior is an individual, and they each kind of have like a different relationship with the Dark Gods and different mutations. You know, some have their armor, like many Warriors of Chaos have their armor literally fused to their flesh, so they can't take it off, and they can't, you know, have intimate relations or any of those other things with other humans. But there's always exceptions, and you know, you have gods like, or you have warriors like Sigvald, who under Slaanesh, his armor has some interesting gaps, and he's actually fully capable of taking his off. But that kind of fills more into Slaanesh's domains, I'll say. Let's go ahead and move on. Proto-Man asks, what do Beastmen think of Skinchangers and Werekin? So, Beastmen do not favor the skin wolf species, as their transformation is only temporary. Most people don't know this, but once the battle is over and their bloodlust has been exhausted, skinwolves and werekin begin to have their flesh like bubble before it sort of pops and deflates like a cyst, and a naked, fluid-covered human will crawl out of that body to begin the cycle anew. Not like a baby, like, an adult. Beastmen hate humanity, with the same passion reserved by dwarves for greenskins and skaven, or the high and dark elves feel about one another. What gods you serve or powers possessed matter very, very little to the Beastmen. Skin changers to them would be like a parlor trick, and if anything would just make them more worthy of sacrificing to the dark gods and devouring whatever's left over. So no, the Beastmen would not really be fond of them. That if anything, they'd hate them even more. Rolana comes to us with the following question. Is it very common for the Chaos Gods to resurrect Norskins into forms more pleasing to themselves as rewards, like in the case of Valkia the Bloody? So, no. Failure, or death, is very rarely rewarded by the Dark Gods, and their power over death is extremely thin other than, like, taking your soul into an afterlife. For instance, like Khorne in his Eternal Battle, or Tzeentch in his Crystal Maze, or very potentially the Inevitable City. Nurgle, you become fodder for his garden, yada yada. Khorne, in the case of Valkia, who I assume you're referring to, Khorne more accidentally resurrected Valkia with his enraged scream at her death. Even Nurgle and Tzeentch, who have an interesting relationship with death and could be considered to have some effect over it, really struggle to yank someone back from it. Nurgle, for instance, only displayed this power in the end times, when the Dark Gods were at the height of their power, and even then, only he was able to sneak one out from under Nagash. That being said, while resurrection from death is insanely rare, it has happened, but it's very rare. The gods are always making their servants into more pleasing forms in the shape of mutations and gifts of chaos. Because that's literally what a mutation is. It's a chaos god for a fraction of a moment, focusing his attention on you and giving you something that makes you more pleasing to him in some way. Which oftentimes doesn't necessarily have a great result because the gods are kind of crazy. And so to them, making your brain explode out of your head, or making you turn into a ghost, or just giving you some horrible mutation that just kills you instantly or makes you into a chaos spawn, to them that's great. They don't care. And they'll forget about you in 2 seconds anyway. So not always a good thing, but most of the time it's just something that makes you stronger. Next, we have Bitchy Lasagna? That's a curious name. Who asks, don't all Chaos Warriors and Chosen come from Norsca and North Empire? I can't imagine a Chaos Warrior from Tilia. So, Warriors of Chaos can come from any land. The Dark Gods revel in human worship above all others. There are warriors from the Southern Realms, Albion, Cathay, Inn, Nippon, you name it. You name a human empire, and the servants of the Dark Gods have originated from there at some point. Now, it's definitely noteworthy that the further north one lives, the more they'll be exposed to the influence of chaos, and thus places like Norsca and the Empire produce more warriors of chaos than most lands. However, some cultures in the world have notable chaos influencer populations, as they've basically accepted it as part of their culture, like the Tzeentch sorcerer cabals in Araby, for instance. The 3 primary sources of Chaos Warriors, though, are the 3 northern tribe nations, which are the Norskins, the Hung, and the Kurgan, who we spoke at length about in the last video. Next is Raw Cauliflower's question, who asks, is Wulfric a normalish marauder, in which he uses salvaged plate armor and receives no special gifts / help from the Chaos Gods, apart from the initial curses he received when he was tasked to defeat the strongest in the world. Otherwise, is he technically a Chaos Warrior or Exalted Hero, despite him leading Marauders instead of Chaos Warriors? For example, did he officially have true Chaos armor that supposedly has the ability to shapeshift to reflect a warrior's patron god? Okay, so Wulfric isn't a full-blown Chaos Warrior in the sense of having God-given plate armor and all sorts of mutations and such. He is an undivided character that's comparable to an Exalted Hero, but he's definitely a Marauder-focused character in intent. His only God-given gift is the gift of tongues, which allows him to speak and understand any language so that he can brutally insult and challenge the greatest warriors across the world. But that's more of a curse than a gift. As for what really cements him well as a Norscan lord, he travels on his magical ship Seafang with a full Marauder crew, and in Tabletop it's very explicit that he can only have a Marauder crew. Also, from a functioning perspective, he does technically have the equivalent of Chaos armor, but his isn't magical or noteworthy in any way. So I would say that don't worry, he's a Norscan in every way that matters, and he fits better with their roster than just Chaos in general. Hopefully that answers your question. Let's see here. Angry Goblin says, I love your channel. How is it possible for Norskins, or any other Chaos army for that matter, to field trolls? Trolls are said to be some of the dumbest creatures out there, so how can a warlord get them to fight for him? I know Throg has some sort of mind-controlling powers over them, but what could a human ever do to convince a troll, since they are not even self-aware? Well, thank you so much, Angry Goblin. I'm glad you enjoyed the channel. It is very much true that trolls are hilariously stupid, but they are actually quite easy to motivate into action. Races like Greenskins and Chaos primarily recruit trolls into their ranks with food, and often keep types of handlers near them to ensure the brutes keep wandering in the correct direction. Whether they're using whips, shouting at them, or literally have a piece of meat on a stick that they just kind of hold vaguely in front of them, trolls are surprisingly controllable until they at least sight the enemy. Once trolls spot something to kill and eat, their single-mindedness becomes really terrifying. As for transportation between battles, Norskins, for instance, will use wheeled cages for many monstrous creatures, or they'll have a shaman or warlord that's been blessed by the dark gods to be particularly gifted at controlling the monsters in their ranks, like trolls. Plus, the thing about trolls is so long as you don't mind them occasionally eating some of your troops and defecating pretty much everywhere, they're pretty damn easy to control compared to the really terrifying monsters in the world. It's the smart creatures you have to watch out for, not the dumb ones. So as long as you're kind of willing to put up with their antics and give them a reliable source of food and direct them towards your enemy, trolls are pretty easy to take care of, all things considered. Alright, technically the next question I have listed is from King Jahariz. Hopefully I said that wrong. But his question is, we literally covered all of it in part 1. It's kind of more of like the what gods do they worship question. So I just want to let you know I saw your question, but we already answered it, so we're going to move on. Cube asks us, first off, thank you for answering my question. You're welcome. Now for Norsca, how is it possible that they have such prominent numbers as they live in such a hell of a place? How can they sustain their growing numbers? Do all Norskins see the Chaos Gods for who they are, or do they first see Khorne, for example, as the god of courage, and then after they are corrupted as the god of war and slaughter? Or do they believe in something different? Are there Norscan tribes that have defied the call to arms by the Chaos Gods? That was a couple questions, but no problem. So, being a raid-focused culture helps the Norskins significantly in this regard. Although the land is indeed quite hostile, like most humans do, Norskins tend to adapt and have learned to thrive considering the circumstances. So their numbers are maintained almost entirely through stealing resources from other realms, being apex hunters, and of course the blessings of the dark gods. Most Norskins are not 100% aware of the four greater powers and what they truly represent, but as we discussed in part 1, they can see them in any number of ways. However, they do all know that the dark gods are not kind or soft. Norskins live in a brutal and harsh life, and thus are more than willing to serve brutal and harsh gods, because to them that makes sense. That's the natural order of things. No full tribe has, and as to the second part of your question, no full tribe has ever resisted the dark gods' call to war. Otherwise, they'd be brutally washed away by the tide and would miss out on the opportunity for crucial raids and glory. But mostly because if you resisted the call, the first thing the Chaos Horde would do is come by your doorstep and just completely evaporate you from the face of the earth. So no, nobody on the Norscan continent resists the call. Gabriel Perella asks, a few questions about Skeggi, so please be patient. Do the Norskins in Skeggi, the settlement in Lustria, still worship the dark gods? And if that's the case, why didn't the lizardmen simply wipe them out, since they are the venomous enemies of chaos? So, okay, yes, the Norskins in Skeggi still worship aspects of the dark gods. The main reason the lizardmen haven't wiped them out is that it's important to remember that the children of the Old Ones are often very slow to act. The Slann in particular will ruminate for hundreds of years before coming to a decision about rather important matters, which is definitely a noted flaw that the lizardmen suffer from. As for Skeggi itself, generally the lizardmen are very busy trying to keep the world from imploding and have a policy of not to bother with others unless it's in retaliation or absolutely necessary. When Lost Ericsson founded the settlement, he strictly forbade his people from entering the deep jungles and focused on raiding only abandoned outposts and building a mighty fort. When some idiots decided to ignore this, sure enough, the lizardmen took action and marched a massive army to squash the settlement. But Lost Ericsson, in an honest act of brilliance, ordered all of their treasures they had looted from the jungles be dumped over the walls. So the lizardmen were simply able to walk up to the walls, grab the one treasure they cared about, and promptly turned around to go home. The Norse of Skeggi learned a valuable lesson that day and have managed to avoid the lizardmen ever after, because they have a very strict set of tenets they follow that basically keep the lizardmen uninterested in dealing with them. Kadavo, however, was a settlement that was not so intelligent. Founded and ruled by the pirate king El Kadavo, he was a colossal nuisance to the temple city of Hexadol, and the lizardmen angrily raised his port on 3 separate occasions at the half-awake mumblings of Lord Mazdamundi when he was bothered about them. Well, of course, the idiot captain returned time after time and kept rebuilding, which led to Mazdamundi being awakened a 4th time in the same decade. This time, he awoke in anger, fully, and looked to the constellations to read the future, discovering that El Kadavo would literally just keep coming back and waking him up if he didn't deal with it. So, the Lord of the Solar City told the Skinks to bring him the largest stegodon they had, being Zlak, and floated his palanquin on top of it. He promptly wandered over to Kadavo and unleashed such a horrific amount of geomantic magic that the settlement was just a crater of blood and collapsed structures, including old El Kadavo himself somewhere in the ruin. And Mazdamundi was never bothered by humans again. Overall, answer to your question though, Skeggi is just too insignificant to dedicate the resources that the lizardmen would need to destroy it in the grand scheme of things, so they just don't care and just don't worry about it. Alright, and today's final question comes from Hendrik Bierbeek, who asks, how do Norscan numbers compare to those of the Empire in Bretonnia? From the Chaos invasions, one would gather they are very numerous. Is this true, and how do they support such a civilization in such a inhospitable climate? So, it's important to remember that invasions from the Warriors of Chaos are comprised of Norskins, Kurgan, and Hung, along with all the ageless and immortal champions wandering the wastes or the realm of chaos itself. Norsca's population is hilariously smaller than the Empire or Bretonnia's. which is why they always favor lightning raids on the coastlines and never engage the southern nations in outright warfare unless it's like a full-scale invasion. If any one of the kingdoms of men truly united and came after them, the Norscans would be hilariously overwhelmed and outgunned. Thankfully, invading Norsca is pretty damn hard for outsiders who don't know the lay of the land, and the Norscans have both a ton of monsters and the dark gods on their side as kind of a deterrent, if nothing else. So that's going to be the last question for today. We definitely have at least one more video. Okay, looking at the remaining questions, I'd say we probably have one more video. So I hope you guys will join me next time for part 3 of the Norscan Q&A. And before I go, I am going to go ahead and reveal that the Patreons took their votes, the patrons, and they chose the dwarves as the next subject for the Q&A video. So, if you would like to have any question whatsoever about the dwarves answered, there are 3 ways you can do it. First, you can go on Twitter and you can do @LSotek to tweet me the question, and I'll definitely answer it if you send it via Twitter. If you're a patron, so 4 ways actually, you can go onto my Patreon page and there's a little section where you'll be able to ask any questions you have about the dwarves, and those questions always have priority. And then you can either post down in the comment section of any of the Norsca Q&A videos, dwarf questions. And finally, you can go on to my Discord, go to the Q&A section or channel, and you can ask any dwarf questions there. So I will have a link to my Twitter and my Discord in the description, not the first comment, the description, because the first comment's going to be all the timestamps. So feel free to ask whatever you want about the dwarves, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening, and I will see you all again soon. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.